one of the core skills of 2025, according to the World Economic Forum, is systems thinking. And the reason is because decision makers are finding themselves in very complicated or complex situations where different strands of information and insights that seemingly are unrelated all still exist within the stuff that you need to know in order to make decisions. So you can have customer insights, you can have competitor insights, you can have internal capabilities, you can have stakeholders, you can have organizational dynamics. And all of these things are things that essentially you need to work with and understand every day. But the problem is that today, what we've done is that we've spread them all out. We've separated them. So customer is one thing, competitor is one thing, internal stakeholders are one thing, etc. But in reality, they all exist in the same thing. They're all happening at the same time, and you have to kind of navigate them all at the same time. And essentially, we don't have any method or map or tool to help us do that. We are trained to separate things into silos instead of seeing the whole thing as kind of one map where we're able to set strategy and make decisions. So I want to tell this story about how in one of our projects we ended up with a systems map as a result of trying to figure out how all of these different kind of parts connect. So what we essentially had first is that there's a workshop. We all get into the same room. There's a cross-functional team, which means in the pharmaceutical industry, you would have sales and marketing, and you would have medical. I'm not sure they were represented in this one. You would have market access, which are the ones that makes the kind of purchasing contracts and sets the price and decisions with the different purchasers. You might have policy. So literally you would have like 4 or 5 different groups of people representing different parts of the organization. Now they all get into this workshop in order to understand the physician. And the way that is normally done in the pharmaceutical industry is that you actually make a map of the patient journey. So you say a patient displays symptoms, the journey continues to the going to the doctor to get a diagnosis, and there's a whole lot of things going around there. And then the diagnosis leads to some tests and further diagnosis. And then eventually you sit in front of a physician that makes the final treatment decision. And then with that treatment decision in place, you go on to treatment and then so on and so forth. It's a very linear kind of event. Now what was happening in this workshop is that we're sitting there with a lot of salespeople. Now these go out and talk to the physicians. So they would have maybe 1 or 5 or 6 meetings with different physicians every day. And so they have a lot of direct conversations with them, deep, direct conversations. And these people would tell us these stories that were fascinating. Like they would really, really help us understand what does a physician feel, what kind of words would they use, what kind of priorities would they set, what was important to them, what was less important. But at the end of that workshop, when we looked back at this patient journey, we could find that none of that information, and none of that information that had been most effective throughout the workshop at helping us empathize and understand the physician, none of it made it into the journey. So we had to ask the question, why didn't it make it into the journey? And the reason was that the journey was pre-made. So somebody made a model before we had the data. And the data didn't fit into that journey. But also that journey is very one-dimensional. A journey is literally it's a drawing or a visualization or representation of something real, but you limit it to a very, very tiny part of what you're trying to understand, you're selecting a very small set of information and saying, this information is more important than anything else. And in our case, we just went to a workshop where it clearly wasn't. So I came back to the team, or to a few people in the team, and we continued working on this because we needed to find out, like, what is really happening? Like, how can we try to build a map of what is really happening in order for us to understand where we could have influence and where we couldn't have influence? And so through these conversations, it turns out, of course, that through the patient pathway, through their kind of symptoms, diagnosis, disease treatment, you can't find a pharmaceutical company. We're not present. Nobody picks up their phone and calls a pharma company and asks, what kind of drugs should I apply? What kind of treatment should I give? That doesn't really happen. And we could also see very clearly that a physician, in this case, would make a treatment decision first, and then you make a product decision. Sometimes they're intertwined, but very often they decide, of course, on the treatment before they choose the product. But we could also find, and this was really important, that those decisions are made really quickly, like insanely quickly, compared to business people like us who spend maybe hours or days, or sometimes in teams, we would spend weeks making maybe even a simple PowerPoint slide. These people are making life or death decisions in minutes. And we had to try to figure out, like, how do they make those decisions? So what we had is that we had this linear patient pathway, and then at one point there's a point of decision making. And in that point of decision making, we had to understand a different narrative, which was, how does a physician make decisions? And especially, how are they able to do it so rapidly? And it turns out that these are our assumptions. My assumptions is that the reason they're making those decisions so quickly is that the physician is not a customer, as the pharmaceutical industry likes to believe. The physician is an analyst. And so what they do is that they look at the data from the patient or the environment, and they look at the data from the medical side and from the research. And they kind of bring those two sets of data together in order to make a decision. So there's kind of it's like an algorithm in the back of their head that has all this data from the scientific field, from the medical field, and they feed it with the data from the patient, and then it just churns out a suggestion. So now you have this patient flow, like going through this flow of treatment. You have at one point there's a treatment decision being made, and you have this algorithm that works really fast with the data, and the physician is an analyst. And still there's no room for the pharmaceutical company. But then you ask, like, how do they get to that algorithm? And it turns out a significant amount of physicians are trying to have the best possible decision-making algorithm. They really want to make the best possible decision for their patients. And the way that they do that, and the way that they try to keep that algorithm in tip-top shape, is that they keep feeding it new information. They keep learning. You would be amazed at how much time a physician spends learning new things. They keep learning, they keep sucking in information, they keep having discussions, they keep changing and updating and kind of improving their algorithm all the time. And in this environment, that's when they want information from many different sources, but including a pharmaceutical company. So now you had this patient treatment kind of pathway going on. You have the decision-making pathway going on, and then you have this kind of complex system of updating their algorithm to make the best possible decision. But these all happen at the same time, and not with one patient. Let's say there's like 150 patients. Like, everything is going on at the same time. There's literally, if you take a step back from one patient and you look at how what work is to a physician, is like everything, everywhere, all at once. There's no chronology. It's like everything, everywhere, all at once. So what we ended up doing was that we tried to kind of start to combine all these insights, and you call them influences, because it doesn't matter when they happen or where they happen. What matters is, do they have influence? Are they leading towards the patient getting a better treatment, or are they leading away from the patient getting a better treatment? And all of these things are related. So you would find that something over there is related to something over there and something down there. And this thing down there doesn't have a relationship to this one, but it goes on to new things. So you create a kind of influence map where you're saying that, how does all of these things exist together at the same time, and how do they influence each other? And what happens is that suddenly you're making this map where you can find the whole market within the same map. You can bring back in your cross-functional team, and you can say to the medical professional or the market access person or the marketer or the sales person, you can say, like, is this your map? Like, you don't have the whole map, of course, but do you recognize your parts? And we found, and again we did this, and again we found the same thing. We found that people kept recognizing themselves inside the map, and suddenly they could see the relationship with the other parts, other people and responsibilities in the organization. So that's where we went from this thin, linear, kind of limiting kind of insights line of how a patient gets kind of pushed like a trolley cart down a train track towards the next station, to this kind of system that was able to understand or kind of include what are the most important things that affects the system according to what we're trying to achieve. Where are we showing up? Where can we show up? And what kind of influence do we have? And so with this map, we were able to plan a much richer understanding of the market in front of us. We were able to see new opportunities of influence. We were able to discuss and prioritize the influences that we already knew. And we were able to collaborate much better as a team, because suddenly everyone understood what they were doing in relation to everyone else, and we could make much better decisions.